authors discussing how post-traumatic stress impacts addiction and recovery. So, has everyone been to a counselor? Has everyone done some kind of therapy? Anybody who hasn't done therapy? Okay, cool. So trauma is a word that gets thrown around a lot in therapy circles. So before we jump into all this stuff, let's try to get all on the same page about what that means. So some of this will make more sense. So what do you guys know about trauma?
It's bad.
Go ahead.
When you realize the trauma, it can affect in so many ways. I've hyperventilated, crying, and didn't even realize what was going on. Thinking about smells and sounds and thoughts. It doesn't matter. Then my dad, he's dealing with trauma all the time from Vietnam. It stays with you if you don't handle it.
Yeah, there we go. So that's a big point about anything traumatic. For it to be traumatic, it has to be something that you haven't been able to navigate, you haven't been able to metabolize or integrate. There's lots of different words for it. But it's something that's happened in your past that continues to negatively impact your life today. That's a good start. What else?
It could be mental, physical, a life-changing event that you're unable to process.
Yeah, for sure. So some trauma is obvious, right? Like somebody gets their leg blown off or something like that. You can see the result of the trauma, right? But there's also things like traumatic brain injury. There's also emotional and psychological trauma that you can't see from the outside, but definitely still have some kind of negative impact. Really important to make a note about that because we've all experienced trauma, whether you want to embrace that and accept that or not, and whether we can see it on your face or not, we're all working through some shit because trauma is just part of existing. It's part of life. What else?
Just any unresolved issue
Yeah.
that has affected you negatively that you haven't either had the opportunity to or the willingness to tackle.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe we could talk a little bit about scale with that comment, right? So trauma can definitely be huge, big stuff, like losing someone you love, right? Or being in an accident yourself, something like that. It could also be something that you're just unprepared to navigate. So I brought up the example of somebody who loses a pet. To most of us, if that's not our pet, it doesn't seem like a big deal. Your cat dies, your cat dies. But if that cat has been someone's only social support, or they've had them for 15 years and they're their best friend, that's going to be a super traumatic experience for that person. It may not seem like a really big deal, but that's a loss. There's going to be grief there. There's going to be sadness there that if you're not intimately tied to that person, it won't make sense, right? So trauma happens on a spectrum. It can definitely be those big, huge things that happen, but it can also be just anything that happens to you in life that you're ill-prepared or ill-equipped to navigate. Anything else? Go ahead.
So something you see something that causes you, I can see somebody get shot or something that traumatized you?
Yeah, for sure, good. So again, it doesn't even necessarily have to happen to us, but the way that we intake input from the outside world. So smells, things that we see, things that you hear, all of that can have some kind of negative impact, again, if you're unprepared to deal with it. It's a good point. Okay, so now we kind of have a little bit of an understanding about trauma. How does trauma interact with either your addiction experience or currently with your recovery experience?
You're not dealing with the trauma, you're just masking it by your addiction. You're burying it possibly deeper in yourself.
Right.
And it's unresolved.
Right.
So you may not be at the mental point to actually discuss or deal with that trauma, depending on the severity.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good research coming out that, addiction is actually a really effective coping mechanism in the sense that it's helping you navigate the world without having to deal with whatever the traumatic thing happened to you, right? So again, you're maybe distracting yourself, maybe it's helping you ignore some of the bad shit that happened to you in life, right? But it's actually keeping you alive in the sense that it's not allowing you to have to deal with all of that negative bullshit that happened. You're dealing with other negative bullshit because of your addiction and the choices that you make while you're using and things like that, but it is sort of like a kind of a helpful tool in the sense that it prevents all that negative bullshit from impacting your life currently.
I'd say on the flip side of what Jack said, which is how it affects your recovery, is that, you know, it sort of carries you down to the point where you realize that you have these traumatic things to deal with. We all know that we're alcoholics and addicts. That's a pretty easy thing to establish. We don't really know why we are the way that we are until we really examine the trauma in our lives and the things that have caused us to drink to forget or to use to forget. And a huge part of recovery is sort of peeling the onion layers back and discovering, well, why did it feel so good to do that the first time? You know, why did I latch onto this thing more than other things? And how does my history help me find a roadmap to why I originally started using it?
Yeah. So part of the recovery process, right, dealing with your emotions with a sober mind can be what Seth was just talking about, where you kind of start to dig a little bit deeper, you kind of start to reevaluate some of your past experiences and start to put the pieces together, hopefully, about how what you experienced led you to make the choices that you made in your active addiction. And now, as you're making the choice not to use or drink anymore, which is great, but now there's no longer that filter of the addiction masking some of that traumatic bullshit. So we kind of need to be able to confront that and accept it and hopefully start to navigate it and integrate it, so moving through this healing process, it doesn't continue to negatively impact your life as you go on. Go ahead, sir.
Can like, if you don't deal with something, and okay, so like people can make a simple mistake in your life and you're like, you snap, like you just don't put up with the bullshit because of the trauma that you've dealt with. You're like, look, I've already gone through this type of bullshit. I don't need this, the petty, stupid mistakes. Like I find myself, I get a little more angry than maybe before my traumatic incident with people just making simple mistakes. Like I guess I mask it maybe with anger. Is that a possibility too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Besides the drug use, of course, but like even when I'm not, I find myself, I get hot fast, but I cool off. I cool off real quick. I kind of, before I put it in perspective, I'm a firecracker. Face gets red. I feel my hair grow. I'm ready to kick them in the legs.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what you're talking about is that in our active addiction, the use is one coping mechanism for sure, but we also develop other coping mechanisms related to our emotions, related to our psychology, right? How we think, even related to like how we show up physically in the world, right? So there's a ton of other things that go along with active addiction that are coping mechanisms, right? So the trick then is, as we start to pursue sobriety, we kind of have to figure out which of those coping mechanisms are effective and useful and helpful, and which of those coping mechanisms might create some more negative byproducts. So your anger response might be justified because of the relationships that you've had, for sure. But now, moving forward, probably not going to do too much positive for your social life if you pop off and get angry at everybody that you interact with.
Right. I catch myself, instead of wanting to kick myself in the leg, I'm like, I'll get it, you know what I mean? Like before, I'm like, oh, I'm bad, that's on me, but I don't eat those little dumb things that happen to me anymore. I have to speak on it because I felt like maybe before, if I'd have said something prior to nothing, the trauma wouldn't have happened to me. And so like I caught myself this morning.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what you're talking about is like boundary setting.
Right.
Yeah, which is a huge part of recovery, huge part of trying to achieve sobriety, and a huge part of healing trauma is like being aware of those past experiences that were negative and then figuring out how you don't want to have to navigate those in the future.
Right.
So you're figuring out how to set some boundaries that help you
On
stay
both
safe.
sides, their boundaries and my boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Anything else on that? Okay. So again, all of these classes really simplify stuff. They make it very linear. So if this feels like too straight of a line to be real life, then let's discuss that, because your lived experience is going to be super complex. There's going to be stuff that doesn't match up with what we're talking about, and that's fine. This is just kind of a basic template of how we can start this discussion. Okay, so 3 parts to this roadmap to healing, and we'll kind of break them down and maybe add some detail to it. So the first thing is to kind of get some more information about what trauma is, how it happens, how it manifests, like generally speaking, and then try to figure out, like in your personal life, in your individual lived experience, those same kind of things. What are some traumatic things that have happened to you? If you can make a list of those, you can start to discuss how they impacted you. Once you can figure out how they impacted you, you can start to reverse program, like, how am I going to start to address this in a meaningful way? How am I going to make some meaning out of this and, you know, have some purpose in this process of healing? Okay? So let's just take 1 minute. You guys all have something to write on and write with. Just off the top of your head. You don't have to think too deep, but write down 5 traumatic experiences. 5 things from your life that you think were traumatic. Okay, once you have those 5 written down, just like in one sentence or phrase right next to it, try to write down how it impacted your life. How did that experience change you in some way? Okay, and then the last little part of this exercise is related to learning body responses. So in this moment, as you guys wrote those down, as you thought about how they impacted your life, potentially there was some kind of reaction inside of you. Maybe you just had like a memory or like a thought. Maybe you had some kind of physical reaction, right? Maybe you felt your hands get sweaty. Maybe you felt your stomach get tight. Maybe you felt your heartbeat increase. Okay? So part of this process is paying attention to how those experiences continue to impact you today, right? And that's the part that we're going to start to learn how to navigate. So it's okay if there are things like being triggered or feeling emotionally dysregulated, right? Those are reasonable human responses. What becomes unreasonable is when those responses start to impact how you are navigating life today. If they prevent you from living a fulfilling life, if they prevent you from finding meaning and purpose in the things that you do, we need to figure out some way to heal that and metabolize it, right? Get it integrated and bring you up to speed so that you're living in the here and now and looking forward to the future rather than continuing to look at what's happened in your past and let it continue to negatively impact you. Okay, so I don't want to make this trauma Olympics. We've all had some hard shit, but let's just go around the room real briefly. Tell me about the experience of writing this down and thinking about how it impacted your life. I don't need details about what happened to you. We're not trying to compare our traumas. What we're going to talk about is what it felt like just now in the last 5 minutes to think about those things again and think about how they impacted your life. Go ahead, sir.
I'll go. It was kind of uncomfortable to think about the stuff, but I think what was more uncomfortable is and I've been in the process of doing this for a couple of years now, of just trying to like work through why I do what I do because of things that have happened.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like, for me, it's more uncomfortable to think about how I behave because of the traumatic. It's like almost like the traumatic experiences aren't as bad as my behavior because of them.
Okay.
So I have a lot of regrets and stuff because of things I've done,
Mhm.
with behavior related to those things.
Okay. Yeah, and that gives us some context, and that's kind of one of the more important points. Like obviously, the trauma, the thing that happened to you, was uncomfortable and bad.
But my response was
Yeah, exactly.
very unhealthy.
Yeah, and also there's like a timeline too, right? Where it probably wasn't just one behavior that you're talking about,
there's
but
a
probably
lot.
like a series of behaviors. Good. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
For me, the process was it's kind of depressing, actually.
Mhm.
But I've seen where when I take all the different events, the one thing that they all seem to lead to is the same things: my ability to build and how I deal with my relationships with people.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's kind of tough. But
Yeah. So you're kind of seeing like some themes.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of a typical thing. It's not always happening, but like, especially if you have some kind of trauma that happens to you early in life, it can sometimes set a precedent, right? It can sometimes establish a foundation for like a whole bunch of other traumas that have similar contexts or similar experiences, right? But longer in your life. So we call things like that complex post-traumatic stress, right? Where you experience similar traumas over and over and over and over again, right? Not figuring out how to get out of that loop or change your behavior or change your environment. Thanks, Dennis. Go ahead, sir.
I found it liberating, actually.
Okay.
Self-discovery is why I'm here. I was already clean before I got here. I didn't come here to get sober. I was already sober. I came here to figure out about myself and how to continue sobriety
Mhm.
and do self-discovery like this. So I think anytime that happens in here, it's a useful thing. So I found it kind of liberating to write these things down.
Nice.
Not that I haven't before, but just,
So it provides an opportunity for reflection.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, building that roadmap to figure out how I got here.
Yeah.
I like to bury mine.
Say it again.
I like to bury mine. So my dad will talk about like some war story that happened to him, and I'm like, Dad, I'm not ready to deal with that yet.
Yeah.
Please stop. And he'll like, Vietnam is all he talks about. Literally, like every time I come to town, he's like, hey, I don't know if I told you, but I was in Vietnam, and it didn't bother me until I had a traumatic experience. And then he'll get so graphic about it, and I'm like, stop.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do it, because I'm not ready to. It's starting to bring up those feelings, and I'm trying to bury it. And so now I'm kind of working on little bits at a time, little bits. And burying it has worked really good for me at that exact moment. However, in the long run, it's kind of been a little bit of experience, a little bit of a ride.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So I think what you're talking about is suppression.
Yeah.
Yeah, suppression is like one of those other coping mechanisms that I talked about earlier, right? It can be super effective in the moment. And even for, sort of a short period of time, to be aware of those things, but also to not access them, to tamp them down. Long term though, right, yeah. They don't go away, right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
You can think about how things fester, right? Or how things kind of rot. Those are two words that I think about a lot when I talk about suppression with dudes, right? Because it's like most of us are socialized not to be very emotional and not to have experiences where we allow our feelings to be on the surface. So most of us have a long history of suppressing things and tamping them down. And again, in the moment it might be very effective, but long term it isn't.
Not so good. I find myself like little bits and pieces of what happened will bring like not necessarily like sadness, but super anger.
Yeah, exactly.
So mad that I'm like starting to shake and just realize how bad I hate whatever it was, or the person, or the situation.
Yeah, and to your point, we talk about anger as sort of a very easily accessible emotion. Typically, though, there tends to be something deeper and more profound underneath that anger.
Sure.
So a lot of times it can be sadness or grief,
Yeah.
right? But there's lots of other stuff that happens too.
And that's what brings out my addiction.
Yeah, and listen to your self-awareness, right? This is a huge part of the healing journey, is being aware that you understand like what your triggers are, how you express them, the fact that what you're expressing probably isn't actually the real thing, but you're trying to mask something else that's deeper and harder to access.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Chris.
Whenever I wrote down my things, I always came up with anger at the end. If I was mad, it made me mad, I was angry, so,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's how I dealt with my trauma, I guess, the whole time. When I look back at it, that's exactly what I did. I mean, no matter what it was, I was angry, it made me mad, and, so, yeah.
And again, this tends to be a very typical experience for men, especially if you've had history in your family of either addiction or some kind of trauma. We can all think about our fathers or our grandfathers and probably remember that their behavior was exactly like what we're talking about. Most of them, the generations before us, either had like really shitty economic experiences or had to deal with things like Vietnam or Korea or the global war on terror, all of those things, right? And they didn't have the resources or the support to navigate that in a meaningful way. So they turned to addiction and, you know, I don't know about your guys' experience, but my grandpa was an asshole, right? My dad went through rehab like 14 or 15 times because he never got the tools and the resources to process that stuff in an effective way. So it's a common experience. Anger is definitely part of that.
I got some device.
Please.
Yeah, I wrote down my things, and, just recently here, my counselor, Carla had, gave me some paperwork about, 6-7 days ago on, distress intolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on ahead and I ended up working that paperwork, not all at once, but, a little bit of time until I got to the end of it. And I'm able now, I have this thing now that I'm able to do to where I'm looking at it as a third person type deal. Because I do feel a lot of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And it had remained a conundrum to me to, it just paralyzed me. I couldn't function as a, I couldn't function in a civilized manner. So what I felt when I wrote it down, and I utilized some of the skill of looking at it from the third party side,
Mm-hmm.
as I felt my face getting warm. I felt my hands starting to warm up, and then I felt anger, but I felt that physical reaction, and that was something that I had been missing all along.
Mm-hmm.
And as I thought back, from the times that I did do it, making this mud puddle into a lake,
Mm-hmm.
essentially,
Mm-hmm.
I understood, that there's a physical side to it as well. And it's something that had remained a mystery to me, but it's no longer a mystery because I'm able to actually allow myself to feel that emotion, that had paralyzed me before.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be able to sit back and look at it from a third person perspective, it helped me significantly to be able to understand what was causing my problem.
For sure.
And I'm new to it.
Yeah.
Albeit, I'm only 15 days totally clean this time.
Mm-hmm. Congratulations.
But I had some components, from 30 years ago when I did quit hard narcotics. I went through treatment.
Yep.
But that was like, almost 3 decades ago. So it's like all of them things that I learned were lost.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to a certain extent,
You haven't
it's
practiced
lost
them in a while.
time.
Yeah.
But then as I relearn it now, it's like I'm actually seeing things that I never remember learning from back then.
Good.
Because the treatment that I did back then was more based upon, the physical reactions of what it did to your neurotransmitters,
Yeah.
different things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And then my study before I got in, understanding that there's new groundbreaking things about neuroplasticity and what it does and what it do.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always looked at it from the, chemical and physical reaction side. I never really looked at it from the perspective that I'm starting to learn today.
Yeah.
Because I imagine, in 3 decades that, your psychological things have just, accelerated and increased. with
Yeah,
knowledge.
yeah, for sure. And I won't talk too much on this, but like the way that we address these things is still really, really new, right? In the sense that people have been experiencing trauma since there've been people, right? But only maybe in the last 50 years have we really like established it as like a, a model that is separate from the medical model. So, right, it's not just neurotransmitters, it's not just a disease that we get, right? There's something that initiates that, and it's initiated on an emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual level. Those things are all part of what addictive behavior comes from, right? It doesn't happen in a vacuum, it doesn't happen in a void. There is a process that happens. And yes, like knowing what happens in your brain when you do coke is important, but really that's not relevant in the sense that it would be more useful for you to understand what we're talking about now, to be able to reflect on your lived experience and say, oh my gosh, this bullshit happened to me and I didn't know how to navigate it, so I started drinking or using coke, and that made me feel better in the moment, so I kept doing it, right? And then saying, oh, the way to really get out of this pattern is definitely to stop doing coke and drinking. That's useful, right? But more than that is to figure out what the trigger is, to figure out what the root issue is and be able to address that. So now you can continue addressing that and moving forward in life, not having to rely on the addiction just to cope with that.
Yeah, it's more of a holistic approach is what
That's
I see.
exactly the word I was gonna say.
Yeah, it's more of a holistic approach, you know, and I understand that our hearts are desperately wicked, different things of, you know, that I had studied as a, you know, Christian, but, you know, it's like, the way I look at it now, it's like, you know, I understand now, it's a thinking thing. It's how we think and how we, you know, how it manifests itself when it comes out of us.
Yeah.
You know, it's a thinking thing, because in our heads, we say, oh, we can't bear it, or we don't understand it, and it remains a conundrum to us, and then we go out and act it out. You know, and whether it manifests itself in addiction or violence or whatever.
Right.
You know, and it's like something that, you know, I feel liberated now that I understand it,
Good.
but it doesn't make my pain any less.
No, and that is not the intent, right? The intent is actually more to feel that pain without the filter of the addiction, because feeling the pain gives you the opportunity to start healing it. This is exactly what we're going to talk about,
It
right?
still sucks.
It will suck, and there's nothing wrong with it sucking because it's a human experience.
Yeah.
And this is part of the issue that I have with like how we've done things in the past. Is it's like people have tried to avoid the hard stuff, where it's like the only way to navigate it and to heal from it and to process it is to embrace the hard stuff and understand that that hard stuff did happen. It was your reality. It had some meaningful impact on you, and now to heal from that, you have to take that as reality and embrace it and say, how do I figure this out?
Yeah. Well, this late in life right now, you know, it's difficult for me because I know that I don't have much time left in my life. You know, because I'm 58 now, and I already know that, you know, there isn't too much left. You know.
You can still make that little bit good.
Yeah, that's the way I'm looking at it. You know, but now that I've been liberated and I understand the things, you know, I feel like an infant.
Yeah, it's a
You know,
starting over. Yeah, for sure.
You know, because it's like, you know, I don't like that overpowering crying thing that goes on with me.
But it'll get
I went
less as you
to, I
go.
went to equine therapy, and she had us do some things with the horse that, you know,
Mhm.
I knew the horse wasn't gonna do. I knew it in my heart, but I thought, oh, well, maybe they trained the horse to do this. You know, so then I tried, and then she was like, oh, how'd that feel? You know, and then all of a sudden I triggered,
Mhm.
because, you know, my main thing that really shattered me was the loss of my wife. You know, but it triggered me because then I remembered her showing horses at the state fair, different things like that. And it's just like all of a sudden I'm just standing there bawling while she's trying to explain to me the skills that you needed to be able to, you know, take this insurmountable problem on this 1,200-pound horse that won't do what you want, you know. And then I started bawling my eyes out, you know. I was like, okay. That's when I started going into the third person, boom, 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 you know, backing out. But then, you know, it's like, I don't know, it's infant. It's kind of like, you know, I feel like an infant on it, but,
Yeah.
you know, I understand it.
Yeah, and you're learning lots of new stuff, so that's unreasonable, and that'll get different as you learn more and as you progress through that journey,
Yeah,
for sure.
for sure.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so, it kind of goes with what, Brother John was saying, but, so like, I didn't put like what I went through, like when you asked, list 5 things, it doesn't necessarily matter. What does matter is that, like you said, you know, we're born in this world kind of like with trauma, like when we're born, like as babies, like we're crying, right? Because we're traumatized, we're just entered the world, and just like the first impression of the world is, you know, that of a traumatic experience, right? And so really what I put was, I take pride, humble pride really, in knowing that I not only survived, but I'm thriving after going through what I know would have really could have taken me out, and a lot of people. But it says here in the Word, actually, James, one of my favorite books. But it actually says, "Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you're met with various trials, knowing as you do that this test quality of your faith produces endurance. But let endurance complete its work, so that you may be complete and sound in all respects, not lacking anything." And so, right, so like it says, God can use bad for good, right? So that's why a common theme in studying the Word is you got to see like what it's surrounded with, what's repetitive, right? But right after it says that, right, it also says, "So if any of you is lacking in wisdom, let him keep asking God, for he gives generously to all without reproaching, and it will be given to him. But let him keep asking in faith, not doubting at all, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven by the wind and blown about. In fact, that man should not expect to receive anything from Jehovah. He is an indecisive man, unstable in all his ways." And so really, it's just about, navigating that trauma. Like John said, you kind of like have that fear aspect because you haven't processed it, you don't necessarily understand it. But God, he can give you that understanding. The Most High can give you that wisdom, and he can transform that trauma. And like I put, I didn't mention it, but for me, I feel like I'm a diamond that was formed from the constant pressure, right? And so really, you can take your trauma and it could be used for something good. It doesn't have to be something that you live with that, bogs you down and, immobilizes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you. And there's, if you guys did research, I'll get to you, Chris. There are quite a few religious traditions that have things like this as part of the tenets, right? The understanding that existence and life is hard just at base, right? And there's ways of navigating that, and it could be God and Jesus if you're kind of in that tradition. There's other traditions that are also secular that have the same kind of practice, like how do we Zen. There's
even though those things have been implemented by a man before, but still, I understand. There's a lot of things that you can't get overpowered by, like there's a lot of guys here, you start talking about the Bible and what it says, they don't want to hear that crap.
Yeah.
Because they don't feel that they have a need for that Christ in their life,
Well,
in their life.
and that's an important point, right? Because to some people, the religious traditions hold value. To some other people, they don't. And that doesn't mean that we can't also provide them with the tools and the support to navigate things like this, right?
Precisely.
Again, if there is
And
a
that's why
religious
you have-
tradition
that's why you have the type of treatments that we have today.
Yeah, exactly.
They say it's a mystery to them. Well, it's a mystery to me, but no, it's not a mystery. It's right here.
There's lots of ways to figure it out.
That's the way you think.
For sure. Go ahead, Chris.
What's holistic mean? What does that mean?
Just like a whole, like a wraparound service. So instead of like myopic, which is maybe like one avenue, we try and provide lots of different ways or different perspectives at looking at healing. So we talked about those 4 pillars. That's the kind of the holistic that I think about: physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual. So if you just addressed one of those things, would you experience some healing? Yeah, you definitely would, right? That's why I always say, like, if you're not in active use anymore, that's a great start. That's the physical part of not being physically addicted to a substance or behavior, right? But if you're not working on the other 3, you have work to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Writing my traumas down right now, kind of associated with the feeling of having an abscess. An abscess, like when it's like picking a scab, squeezing an abscess you've had for a long time, and it hurts really bad to squeeze it, but getting this pus out and getting the infection out type of thing. And that's kind of like the association I had with it when I was writing it down. It was like, ooh, this hurts, like, I don't know if you ever had an abscess.
I have.
Infection or something like that. And, and putting the hydroperoxide on it, kind of makes you feel better and stuff. So, looking at it on paper, like the hydroperoxide on an old infection that I've had forever that
That's a great example. That's
Analogy?
analogy, yeah, great analogy.
Yeah, one more thing I just have to add,
Yeah, it's-
just for my fellow associates in here, you know, it's like, you know, they're on that holistic approach, you know, that I believe that you should address the spiritual component of your recovery.
I do too.
You know, I really believe that that's an essential part, and that's how come AA and NA and them guys can make it more accessible for you, because then, this to me, you know, I'm a Christian, you know, even though I'm in argument with God at this point, which I won't win that argument, but still I'm a Christian. But to others, I see, and I've saw, you know, from the past and dealings with AA, NA, and different components that I utilized back there to get sober from drugs. I see that, you know, these people, they consider it a mystery, but when they release it to their higher power, then they're able to stabilize themselves, you know, because then it's just taking it all outside of yourself,
Yeah.
releasing it.
Yeah.
You're saying, okay, I can't handle this, you handle it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it gives you time to heal. And that's why my recovery was super solid, you know, on the drugs.
Yeah.
You know, even though it took 3 years before I picked up that 6-pack in that grocery aisle, but still, you know, I can still look at it and go, yeah, it was my holistic approach that really helped, you know, because I hit it from all components.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you found a tradition that works for you, but we also do need to be clear that spirituality doesn't equal religiosity.
Yeah.
So there's lots of ways to interact with the divine, to experience awe, to understand that you're a very small part of a very large universe that can do the same thing that you're talking about, but it doesn't have the religious component. And it's just important for me to mention that because sometimes the religiosity and everything that comes with that can be too much for some people, or overwhelming, or just doesn't jive with how they live their
Restrictive.
lives.
That's
Yeah,
what I would
exactly.
say.
So it's important that there's ways to access that spirituality, and I do believe you, and I believe that you have to access it as part of your recovery. It just doesn't always have to be church or prayer or things like that.
And that's why AA and NA works.
Yeah. For
certain.
for some people, yeah, for sure. Whoop.
I think I learned how to swallow spit. I was gonna echo what John said, and I think that's what makes NA and AA and programs like that so easy, is that it's not, a lot of people have a problem with the idea of God or religion, and they make it so easy by just saying, you just find your higher power, whatever that is. I mean, it could be it could be nature, it could be your friends and family, it could be anything, could be your higher power, you know? And while that's true, we don't go through everything that says God and change it to higher power or anything like that, but it's just knowing, for the people that do have an issue with religion or anything like that, they make it very easy for you to not get caught up in that thought trap of, oh, well, I'm agnostic or I'm an atheist and I can't possibly, use the word God or higher power or anything like that. So that's a very nice thing, as John said, that they make it really easy for you to come to grips with, like, that's one little part of the whole thing.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cross.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I understand.
That's one little part of the whole thing,
For sure.
And it's one that you gotta get through to get through to the other steps, but it's pretty easy to just say, my higher power can be, could be your dog. I think you said yours was your dog. And like, it doesn't matter, it's a placeholder, and it could be an ever-changing thing as well.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna try and get through these last two before we get on a break.
Sure.
Good interaction though, that's why I like teaching this class, right? Like, I have an idea of what we'll talk about, and sometimes it goes different than that, so I appreciate you guys' input. Okay, and really we've kind of already touched on these, so that's good. Like, the conversation is guiding us in the right direction. So once we have some understanding of trauma, which we did, right? Once we figure out like what it feels like to start experiencing some of those things, which you guys talked about, now we're in the process of rebuilding a sense of safety and reconnecting to self. So that's kind of like where we are right now. In the process of detoxing, going through withdrawal, getting to your first couple days with a clear, sober mind. This is your opportunity to start rebuilding your sense of safety, right? Talk about this environment right here. None of us are really in harm's way in this moment right now, right? probably for most of your experience going through residential care, you're never really in danger, right? In the sense that some of us have been in some really, really destructive and harmful situations, and you're no longer in those situations. So it's an opportunity for you to start thinking about what it feels like to just sit in a chair peacefully and feel what it feels like to feel your feelings in a safe environment, right? I would never suggest that you guys try to process or integrate any kind of trauma when you're in a situation that doesn't lend itself to that process. If you're out on the street, if you're experiencing houselessness, if you're experiencing any other kind of situation where your basic needs are not being met, it's probably not going to be a good time to delve into all the other bullshit that happened to you and try and process it. You kind of need to be in a situation like this where most of the external distress has been removed, and you really have to go internal and start navigating that stuff. Okay, so rebuilding a sense of safety, reconnecting to yourself. Reconnecting to yourself is sort of like thinking about the core of who you are, right? We talked a lot about archetypes and the characteristics of archetypes, right? What part of you still feels like a warrior? What part of you still feels like a lover and a monarch and a magician, right? There's little bits of those in all of us. Lots of times our active addiction clouds those over. We end up acting in ways that don't align with our values or who we feel we are truly. Now, as you're in sobriety, now as you're working through treatment, it gives you an opportunity to reflect on that, to think back to like, what is really important to me? What are the values that I hold dear, and how do they manifest in my life? Okay. Last one, change the narrative, integrate the here and now. So change the narrative. This is why I always ask you guys to write things down, right? Because every time you write something down, every time you make a note, every time you do a journal entry, it's kind of like a placeholder in the whole process, where in that moment, you write down the things that feel relevant, the things that feel timely, and then at some point, you'll be able to go back and reflect on that. You'll be able to look at what you wrote last week, and then you'll be able to say, well, how did that impact the week that I lived since I wrote that down, right? So there's like this constant process in the beginning of reinventing yourself, right? Like John was talking about. There's some feeling of like being brand new at this, right? There's some feeling of like not understanding how to navigate the world and yourself as you come into sobriety, especially if you've been in active use for like decades, right? Where 30 years of drinking has impacted who you are. Now you don't have that anymore. So there is like figuring out who you are all over again. You're in charge of that. So changing the narrative is super important, right? And then obviously integrating the here and now. This is like the big deal, right? Being able to take all of the silly bullshit that's happened to you, being able to reflect on it, being able to understand how it impacted your life, then being able to bring it to the present and say, okay, that stuff's not happening currently. The things that still impact me are A, B, and C, and now I have ways of addressing each of those, whether that's therapy, whether that's exercise, whether that's attending groups and meetings or church and all of that stuff. There's tons of ways that you can start impacting those things in real time in the here and now, and it gives you a new starting point, right? So instead of the starting point being the trauma and your active addiction, now as we move into sobriety, we have kind of a reset of sorts, right? Where we can take this experience and now we can set up a foundation so that moving forward, hopefully we're in a better place.
I thought coming here, I was so nervous and really scared because when I got out of that car, I felt like it was moments before the shooting. I felt like it was that big a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And in my religion, you want to die as a warrior. And I was pissed because I didn't die when I got shot. I was standing up for what I believed in. I was protecting my family, and I didn't die. And I could have if the ambulance had been 4 minutes later, or if it had been 4 months prior. They wouldn't have had the technology to fix me. And so I was like, you fucking took me away from my warriorism. I was supposed to die like that, you assholes. But now I see that the war and the warrior is me saving myself instead of a violent act. I'm still fighting. I'm still a warrior. It just changed the paradigm a little bit. At least I got to fight for myself rather than stand up for somebody else and get this. I'm now fighting for myself, so it kind of changes, it shifts everything. And this last week, I still feel like if I died right now, I would still go to Valhalla as a warrior, because now the fight is different. The fight is to save my life rather than protect someone else's. So I just shifted that, and it's helped a lot.
Yeah, great example, right? So that's leaning to the point of like, even though we have an understanding of how we manifest the characteristics of those archetypes in one way, when life changes, those don't go away, right? They just evolve, right? You figure out how to manipulate them, you figure out how to tweak them to get to the point where it's like, okay, I can still do the things that I want to do, but just from a different perspective or a different, yeah, exactly. Okay, good work. That's the first hour. Thank you for your time and attention. When we come back, we'll talk about consequences of trauma, and we'll get to the first 3 steps. Be back at 10:30 because you can't go anywhere else.
That was good.
Next one.